Hello, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. This morning, we will be looking at a few short suttas that I will post right now in the comments, so you can read with me as I go along. So, typing them in, and you're welcome to click on the links in the comments and read with me. We'll actually read both of them first and then share a few words. But before we proceed, we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, the reason why we're gathered here today. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Bhutam dhammam sangham namasami. So this morning we're going to read a couple of short poems from the Therigatha. So the verses of the elder Tissa and the verses of another elder named Tissa. So that's Therigatha 1.4 and 1.5, very short poems. So the first one goes, these are the instructions from the Buddha to Tissa. And he says, Tissa, train yourself with discipline. Do not let bonds tie you down. All bonds unbound, walk in the world free from influences. And the second one is still the Buddha, speaking to another elder named Tissa. Tissa, bind yourself to the Dhamma, waste no time. Those who waste time sorrow when they arrive in hell. Very beautiful poems. I have to say that it's very interesting because we see in the sort of first poem how the Buddha is emphasizing essentially letting go of everything. And this is usually what we hear a lot in many Buddhist circles. There's always a big emphasis on letting go, big emphasis on letting go of all of our attachments. So here, what has been translated as bonds can also be translated as attachments, as ties, as anything that basically keeps us bonded to samsara, keeps us essentially attached to this predicament that we're in as sentient beings. And so by training ourselves with the training that the Buddha has given us, so here it's the Pali is Sikhasu Sikhaya, so like literally training ourselves with the trainings. So has been rendered training ourselves with discipline. It can be obviously the monastic vows, since she's a monastic, but it also just has that sense which is relatable to all of us, which can be obviously both the precepts and also just practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. So everything that the Buddha has taught us, the inheritance of the Buddha. And while we're doing this practice, to try to avoid to get essentially any attachment to hold us back. So to identify the attachments and to let them go and to let them go, to let them go until once, as soon as we essentially achieve that state where we are completely unattached, then we'll be walking in the world free from influences. So obviously the influences here is a translation a word that has been used to translate the asavas. So sometimes the asavas, we see them, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi translates them as the taints. some others as contaminations or whatnot. In my translation of the Trigata, I decided to translate them as influences. So something that, um, in my experience, is pretty much those kind of like those tendencies of mine that somewhat take over, that kind of influence us in doing, in taking one action as opposed to the other one. And so they are usually, we can talk about three asavas. Kamasava, bhavasava, and avijjasava. So essentially the tendency, the influence of sensual pleasures. So then the influence of becoming. So of constantly being in sort of this predicament of wanting always to generate a new state of existence, the influence of existence, one can also say. And then, of course, the influence of ignorance that fuels this whole process. Sometimes in the canon, there's also a fourth asava, which is the ditti asava, so the influence of taking on, different opinions, perhaps speculative views. And so this is what the Buddha essentially tells us in this poem and the instructions to Tissa, that once we let go of all of this, we will be finally free from all of these constant conditionings that we experience in the world. And so this can lead, though sometimes, these instructions can lead to a bit of a confusion, which I think is what then is addressed to another elder Tissa by the Buddha, which is, yes, of course, this is, in this practice, we ultimately want to let go of everything. But before we do that, we shouldn't rush too much to get rid of everything, but rather understanding that it's a process, and it's a process that can only be done if we tie ourselves first and foremost to one thing, which is the Dhamma. So we see here that the Buddha says, Tissa, actually bind yourself to the Dhamma, right? So before it was, to not let bonds tie you down. So one can say, okay, I will also not let the Dhamma, tie me down. And I'm kind of like already doing that practice, not to get too attached to the Dhamma, but rather the Buddha instead is pointing to something else, that we actually do have to attach to the Dhamma. The Dhamma is the vehicle that will lead us out of suffering. And so he literally gives that instruction very clearly, to bind ourselves, to attach ourselves, to really tie ourselves to the Dhamma, wasting no time, making that the priority of everything that we do. And so this is also, we can say that essentially tying ourselves to the Dhamma is basically another way that the Buddha essentially is pointing out with the simile of the raft in other parts of the Pali Canon. So, of course, if we want to go from one shore to the other shore, and we have a raft, we don't want to let go of the raft before we reach the other shore. But then, of course, once we've reached the destination, it would be quite silly to take the raft and put it on our shoulders and keep walking and walking and walking with the raft on our shoulders. We don't need it anymore. We've reached the destination. So in the same way, then, once we reach the far shore, then we can let go also of the Dhamma, but we want to make sure not to do that ahead of time. Otherwise, we will drown on our way there, or it will be very, very difficult to, once again, reach the destination. And then he wants to really make sure that we get the point across. So he says, those who waste time sorrow when they arrive in hell. And this highlights essentially the fact that if we don't really prioritize the Dhamma, if we don't attach ourselves to the Dhamma, if we don't really investigate the Dhamma, ultimately we will, make decisions based out of our own accord, based out of our kind of sort of intuition. And sometimes our intuition will be wholesome, our intuition will be kusala, and some others it will be akusala, it will be unwholesome, because it will be tainted by all the influences that we were talking about before. And that ultimately will lead us to then make some actions that are, yeah, quite harmful. And that will lead us to a bad destination, which will then slow up the process altogether. This is also why we highlight so much how important it is in Buddhism to have this human rebirth, because it's such a special, incredible state where we can really have an understanding of dukkha, but also not be overwhelmed by dukkha. That doesn't prevent us to practice the path. And this, of course, entails also having access to the Dhamma, also having access to the path, so having those conditions that make us understand the teachings of the Buddha, make us want to practice the teachings of the Buddha, and allow us to practice. Then we have this fuel, this motivation to really do the work that needs to be done. And so, yeah, we have a really incredible opportunity right now. So we should waste no time and really attach ourselves to the Dhamma. And with these words, I'll end this morning, and then we can see if there are any questions or comments, and we can address them from there. So we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right. Good to see a lot of friends joining in. Hello to Gita, Douglas, Res, Yankee, Matthias, Richard, a friend from Nepal. Great. Jayanta, Amaranta, and Sud. Great to see you all this morning. So at this point, if you have any comments, questions, we can see if we can discuss them. I hope you've enjoyed these suttas as much as I have. They're actually short little poems, but I think they're very quite to the point. All right, well, it doesn't seem like there are any comments. Hello to Jung or Jung. Not sure how to pronounce your name, but good to see you as well. I'll give it a few other seconds to see if anything comes up. Otherwise, I think that's all for this morning, and we will be meeting again this evening together also with Bhante Sudazo, and there will be nice discussion on how the Buddha gave his directions for lay people and how to really cultivate the path as a lay person. All right, well, doesn't seem like there's any comments or questions popping in, so I'll take the opportunity to thank you all for your attention and for taking the time this morning to listen to the Dhamma and contemplate the Dhamma. And I hope that all of you will bound yourself to the Dhamma and and let all the asavas go and attain blissful supreme Nibbana. So I'll see you in a couple of hours. May you be all well and happy and peaceful, and may all good things come to you.